Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Parkitect. Today we're finishing off our Arabic and Middle Eastern theme park, Mystic Oasis. I'd like to start off by saying thank you to everybody that gave me such good ideas in the last episode, especially the comment about adding lanterns to the park, because there were so many different designs that I came up with just to support the lanterns that I ended up reusing over and over again throughout the park. And without that comment and those suggestions, there was no way I was ever going to be able to come up with that by myself. So thank you. And I'll also leave a message saying if you could, and you have other ideas for our new space theme park that we're going to be making, I believe, in the next episode, let me know what you guys want to see with that, because I have a couple different ideas, but it may not be what you want to see. So if you have good suggestions and ideas, please leave a comment and let me know what they are, and I'll try to incorporate them to the best of my ability. You'll have to take in mind with a grain of salt that my architecture is getting better, and you'll see that throughout the course of this episode. I do think that I am improving, but it's still not quite to the level of those of Silverette and Rudy Regimental and Lay Designer and Corrales and all those really good design YouTubers that build both in Minecraft, Planet Coaster, um, Parkitect, etc. But I am getting better, and with every episode there's improvement, which is a good thing. So I appreciate that, and this, which I think you will agree after watching the rest of this video, is definitely my favorite part. But now that I've blabbered on for almost a full minute here, let's get back to what we're building, because this is probably one of my favorite sections of the park. And the main reason behind that is, number one, it butts up to the northern part of the Oasis. And so for those that are going to the queue line, there's really cool scenery, a mix of trees and palm trees. I kind of got into that last episode with, I'm not quite sure the trees would survive, but we're going to go with, since it is fertile land, that the trees would survive. But I love the different texture changes between the sand. I guess I don't know if that's a mixture between sand and dirt, and then the grass that surrounds the oasis and the pond. I also love that this big complex of buildings really serves as not only a divider between the different sections of the park. I think there ended up being three main sections that I built here. There's kind of this western section that's more in a plaza. There's a southern kind of shopping district type section, and then there's a more eastern section that you'll see building later that kind of encompasses almost like a palace type thing. And it's kind of sad that my roller coaster unlocks for this park were really pathetic. I know that the Junior Coaster and the Gerstlauer Eurofighter were the default coasters that you get with the park, but my random coasters that I got were a wooden coaster followed by a spinning coaster. It feels like those have a higher percentage chance of getting picked. Whenever I watch videos of people playing, they tend to always get B&M inverts or dive coasters or just really exciting coaster types, flying coasters, I guess. And I would love to try my hand at one of those. I have a feeling that the first one I build will probably not turn out to be that great, but I really would love to build one. I just have not had the opportunity yet. So we ended up having a palace, which is kind of a spoiler, but you'll kind of see later on. And we had to stick with a junior coaster in it. But going back to this complex, since I'm still kind of adding to it right now, it serves as a divider for all the different sections of the park. And it kind of ties them all together. Mainly, most of the buildings in the park have slightly different color variants, which is a good thing, I think, especially when all of the styles are very, very similar. They do all have different pillars and I guess stucco work on the sides of the buildings, but Middle Eastern buildings are very flat minus the stucco work, right? There's not a ton of color variation, so the fact that this all ties in unison, it brings all the different sections that do have the different color schemes together. The other part that I liked about this is that I really was able to include the different height elevations throughout the whole time too. And that, extends not only from the buildings I'm building here, but to some of the other buildings I build in the park. I was able to add the different spires, and there was a tower on the corner of the queue path right next to, I think that's the Matterhorn. I forget what the ride name is called in game, but I think in real life it's the Matterhorn. I guess maybe not, because you're not quite going sideways when you're spinning around. But yeah, the other thing I really liked about this whole entire complex is that I was able to make all the queue paths kind of run next to each other. And although in the image that you guys are seeing on screen right now, it looks like it's closed off, I do open it up off screen. So all the different queue paths for the three different flat rides, they're all bordering this little plaza center that I actually did leave like a downwards path too, so that technically employees could go and tend to the plants. Because I thought that if it was completely closed off by walls, it would make it a little bit unreasonable. But I also didn't want to add like the employee pass that make people really upset to see. So didn't add the employee pass, but did add some realism in the fact that there is technically a walkway to get down there. But I just thought that since this is number one, a really arid climate, and the guests are apparently really hard to please, so we had to get covers on all the queues. Being able to tie all the different queues into this big like complex of buildings and then make it make sense is really really neat. The other thing, like I said, was elevation differences. So we have some buildings that are going up. We have the spires, we have the towers. But the one thing I really, really wanted to do was, since there's an elevation difference from when you come into the park versus that like oasis there, that in that open area, I wanted to keep the oasis very, very open and like untouched, so that it looked cool to see from multiple different viewing angles. But I also wanted people to be able to see it from their respective queue lines. So the sun is being blocked from above, which will help with a lot of the humidity and maybe it won't help with the humidity and the heat unless there's air conditioning units inside of the different hallways. But it will help with some of the direct exposure to sunlight, which will tire guests out. If I was a greedy corporate park owner, I guess I could, just remove all the path coverings, and then when people come to the park, they can just get the soft drinks and different things like that, and that would boost revenue, and then I wouldn't have to worry about taking a loan later on in the episode. But, and I guess I should clarify, the loan was not needed. I was trying to meet the optional goal, which I missed. But, yeah. I really like the different styles that they use on the entrance buildings, too. I know that I try not to copy, like, directly from the entrance buildings ever, but they do this really interesting technique where they place the walls, like, on a slight offset, and then they add in, like, a little overhang to it. So there's technically a gap there, so in real life, obviously, that wouldn't work. But in the game, it looks like really nice because it looks like the stucco is kind of inverted on the walls. Like there's a little carving cut out of it. And that adds a little extra texture that would not be there otherwise. I think last episode I also talked about how I opened up Pandora's box by adding in tons and tons of like the basic shape. And that was definitely true, because I cannot tell you the amount of times that I opened up the shape window to add different squares and different things, to add those different textures for the stucco, and kind of make a nicer connection between most of the pillars that are in the park. And then the borders are just a little bit too thin. So the only pillars that really look close to like the Arabian theme are the really fat ones. And in Parkitect, there's really two choices. You have the really fat pillars, which either come in squares or rounded, like columns, I guess, is the best way to describe them. Or I guess they do have like cylinders, but they're all fat. Then your other option is the square, very thin ones. And so there's not much of a transition between the two. But I found out that if you're able to use either just the normal squares and shrinking them down really far, or if you use some of like the half hemisphere circles, you could really help out the transition between those two and make the pillars look a lot better. Another thing that I kind of struggled with at first was ways to make the roof designs look different. I know a lot of them have like the circular domes on the top. I forget the names of what those are called right offhand, but I couldn't have that for every single building, and I wanted, like I said, all the buildings to be slightly different. So this one ended up turning out pretty okay, just by adding this little second middle section. It's slightly smaller and in the middle of the top of the building. And I think that turned out pretty well too. Generally speaking, when I'm working on a park of something like this size, it's really tough to get started and really figure out what you want to build and where. I usually have like a rough idea of, once I get one thing placed, what potentially could go nearby. Like I never know necessarily which rides will best go where until I actually see the kind of space that I'll have after I build some of the buildings. But just to try to get like a rough footprint at least, or like a blueprint, is hard to start doing. But once you're able to kind of do that and you have a like a blocky thing, it's kind of best to just start throwing pieces together. because it's really hard to tell what things will look like until you just throw it all out there and see what it'll look like. I tend to have like a practice park that I'll start when I have a different theme, and I don't build very much on the practice park at all. But for like this theme especially, I had never done anything like Middle Eastern before, and so the different types of pillar work and different stucco on like the faces of the walls was something that took a little while to get used to, but once I was able to do it on a few different buildings, it came pretty much like secondhand, almost like clockwork, honestly. And the knockoff onion shape, I guess, um, archways. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word for a second. Yeah, the knockoff onion shaped archways that I put everywhere did get kind of overused, but and for those that don't know, that's actually just the medieval piece. So if you've ever played Parkitect before, there's not too many different archways. There's, I think, wooden ones, normal stucco ones. There might be glass ones, and then the medieval stone ones. And so these are actually just the medieval stone ones that they look fairly close to the typical like Middle Eastern Arabic onion-shaped domes or onion-shaped arches. So I think those turned out pretty well, and they do get kind of overused. But if you mix them up with enough different pillars and other stucco work, I think that they can turn out to look pretty solid even if you're using them all over, which is what ends up happening all over this park. The other nice thing about having practice parks, though, is that you get, for the most part, you get to look at the different parts. I was trying to figure out a way to say that without saying parts twice, but there it is. And the problem that I had with the Arabic theme is that I've seen other people, and like in my practice parts, I've seen different parts that I thought would look really great, especially different decorations. And although Silverette, who actually is the map designer of this, I forgot to mention that in the last episode, there's not a ton of pieces. And well, to be fair, Parkitect does not have like a Middle Eastern theme at all. So everything you're using is just pieces from other themes to make it look or like resemble the Arabic theme. But there's not a lot of there's some details that are missing in the base game that I've seen other people use and that I've used in different custom parks that you do not have here. So you really do have to get creative with some of your techniques that you're doing. But that's a good thing because the more you're able to try out different pieces that you would not normally use in the game, the better you are in future parks and different themes to kind of experiment a little bit more. And experimentation is like the only way to come up with new ideas and cool things. And although I'm fairly certain that every technique I use here, even if it was I hadn't seen it before, has probably already been used by someone else. So I'll take that with a grain of salt. But I do like the building that we are building now. This is supposed to be kind of just like a corner of the park. It looks really bad from the back, but it has one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to have a restroom on this side. I did something really bad logistically in the first episode, which was I put the main section of the park on the opposite side of where all the different crew facilities are. So the trash chute, where all the trash goes, all the supplies that come in. I don't know if by default the game gives you a rest space for your employees. I don't think so. So my employees in the past, I think 7 parks that I've had, all probably hate me, and I truly apologize to all my past employees because I've yet to put in a staff break room. I've kind of just sat some benches behind fences and gave them some umbrellas, which actually I think you can see tucked away right there. There's one of the umbrellas with the bench. So that's their rest spot. They can rest outside, eat their lunches outside in the great outdoors, and they'll already be hot as all get out from working outside. So it can't be that bad. But getting back on topic, since I put everything, or for the most part, everything on the other side of the park, I did not want to have to drag the haulers. So if you haven't played Parkitect before, or if you have, you already know this, but haulers are how you get your different supplies from one part of your park to the other for all the different buildings. And guests really hate seeing the different crew or I guess employee pass that they have to haul all the goods on. So yeah, I really screwed myself over there, but this one ended up just having a restroom in it. And so the building's kind of divided into two, where the left side goes to the restroom and it's kind of tucked away so no one has to see it. And there, actually, I think since it's invisible, you can actually see it. But and then on the right side is just another form of the queue path being tucked away through the buildings to keep some heat. And then the pavilion kind of tent looking things that I overuse way too much in the park. But I do think that every single queue path needs some sort of covering for it, especially in this kind of climate. And for the most part, Middle Eastern like design, like I said, is very, very flat facing walls, and so I couldn't think of anything that was like a really good design for a queue path covering other than the colorful like fabric stuff, which I think if you're looking at like an Egyptian marketplace or any really marketplace in like the Middle East, like you'll see a lot of like those bright colors or variants of different colors and fabrics and stuff. So I think that ties into the theme pretty well. But now I've already missed where we've gone to already, and here we are making our next little section of shops. So as I talked about just a few minutes ago, all of the shops I had to build, I had to connect to a depot. So since there was no real way to bring the crew over on like employee pass to the side of the park, I really just had to go for it and drop the $2,000, which is what a depot costs in this game. And if you can see my money on the bottom left-hand corner here, I did not have a lot of it throughout the entire game. I was basically just pausing the game, letting the money collect for a little bit in hopes of trying to complete the park and all the optional goals by year 2 of March. And I think here it's like year 1 November. Yep, that looks right. And so I'd pause the game for a little bit, try to build up enough money so that I could save up for, finishing off these buildings, build the buildings. Hopefully that draws in some more guests, which I'm not entirely sure if it's only opening new attractions or if maybe food and stuff that opens attracts new guests as well. If anybody knows the answer to that question, actually, I'd really love to if someone would post in the comments, because I'm really not sure what draws in new guests. If it's like an organic thing that over time the game just has some sort of algorithm that it throws them in, or if it's just like the opening of new rides and attractions. Because I was hoping that maybe by adding balloons to the park, that people would go home and be like, yo, this park has balloons. It's the coolest park I've ever seen. What parks do you know that have balloons that let you carry them around? I can't think of a single one. Well, probably because if a balloon flies off and gets caught in a coaster, that could, destroy something. But I could be wrong too. If you know of any parks that have any balloons in them, I mean, maybe some smaller ones, or maybe like carnivals do. But yeah, I don't think balloons are such a common thing. So my park is cool. It has balloons and they're see-through. Maybe that's a bad thing. But speaking of balloons, actually, I know this is really off topic from what we're building right now, but I had never seen, there's a specific guest, and I'm not sure if it's an Easter egg. I'll have to look it up after I'm done recording here. But there was a guest that I saw in my park, and he stayed for almost the entire time that I was building here. But he had a balloon, like almost like an astronaut helmet, but it was just a completely clear, looking like the texture of the balloons here in the screen, helmet. And I could not find anything like in his, so you can like open up and click on the guest and see their different information where they've been and stuff. And he hadn't bought a balloon yet, so it wasn't like a glitch with the balloons, at least I don't think. So it must be like a little Easter egg that the makers of Parkitect add, and that's pretty funny. But I guess getting back to what I'm building here, I really like this block of buildings because, as I mentioned earlier, I think that most people, if you ask them what they thought of Middle Eastern architecture, they would probably say something like this, where they have multiple different variants and heights of the buildings, and they'd probably tell you one of the scenes that they've seen in a movie where they've seen people, like even in like Aladdin or I think even Aquaman has like a scene of like something like that where they're jumping from building to building, running up the staircases, which is actually why I had to include one from the different rooftops. And then I think that rooftop even connects into the building with the balloons in it. So it's kind of weird actually that you can see the balloons from the outside in the building. But alas, I digress. It looks okay, and I think this is pretty much what people would think of when they think of Middle Eastern architecture. And because of that, I love this whole plaza, especially if you can think of the guest that's on that ride. You are truly immersed when you're in that. You can't see anything outside of the theme that the park is trying to show to you. You have buildings on the right. You have like the fabric tents on that you walked under to get to the ride. I mean, overall, it's just a really cool experience and a good thing for the guests to have. Now, although this little section that I'm building right here doesn't seem too spectacular, it's just a few different lines on the side of the building, it's one of my proudest things. I know I said that I like what we just were working on the most, but that was one of my proudest parts of the park that I worked on, purely because I think it adds such good transition. And I'll get back to that in a second, because here is actually the lanterns that we put up and the design I came up with for one of the pillars. But well, you'll see that again here in a few seconds when I finish up this little transition. So, as I mentioned before, the middle section of the park is kind of like this big divider between the different sections, but you can transfer, or I guess walk between different sections of the park from other different spaces. So, although this side of the building kind of looks boring, it's supposed to be that transition between the different themes, or I guess sub-themes of our Middle Eastern park. So you're walking down the staircase, right? You get to walk past the roller coaster that's on your right. There's a really plain building which isn't supposed to distract you from what's going on in like your visual, surroundings. And I really like that concept, and I think it turns out really well. But I guess we'll get back to that in a few seconds, because I forgot that we added another flat ride in here because we were getting pretty close to, I think, just over 300 guests in the park at this point. And I was really trying to see if I could avoid adding another coaster in to hit the 400 guest mark. And not because I didn't want to ride another coaster, but because I was not with the junior coaster. Okay, here we are. Here's that little section. So, as I was mentioning before, I really wanted this to be a transition between those two sections. So by adding, another grouping of the different tents and stuff, which I think actually fits super nicely underneath the brake run of the Gerstlauer, which, by the way, brake runs, although they're everybody's least favorite element when they're on a ride, can look really, really cool to have things underneath or pathway interaction with. So they do serve some purposes other than just slowing down the track and making your ride experience not as fun. But yeah, I was able to use this transition wall to add those little pillars, some more lanterns, and really liven up the that section of the park, or I guess subsection and divider of the park. But now, alas, here we are, my least favorite coaster type of all time now, and I think it's going to continue to get worse, the junior coaster. So as I was mentioning before, I was really dreading trying to add one of these into the park. And so I think that's why I added in and didn't even work on a station for the flat ride over there right away. I really did not want to add this because the layouts on junior coasters are not very interesting. They're very simple, maybe a few airtime hills, like very, very small basic ones. But it's that and helixes. There's no loops, there's no anything. It's not that great of something to look from aerial perspective, and it's not really that great to look from any park perspective either. There's no points of reference for the coaster that make it look really appealing. I am happy with the layout of it, given the fact that it's pretty boring. I think that it turned out decent enough. It has a few elements. The stats from it aren't great. I think the excitement is like a 40 and the intensity is like a 20, and these are all out of 100 if you did not know that. But so yeah, happiness or excitement of a 40, intensity of like a 20, and the nausea, thank God, is like a 2 or a 3, because there's a lot of other rides in my park that make people nauseous, and I had to employ, I think, 4 or 5 different janitors just to try to clean up after that. So I'm glad that at least I had one ride that did not make people nauseous. Now, another thing that I remembered, which I always forget to do when I'm building rides and or just placing down flat rides, is change the colors. Because I think that we've seen the red coaster track on a junior coaster plenty of times in my several parks that I've built so far, and it's definitely time for a change. Not to mention that the light green color scheme just fits so well with the, stereotypical colors of an Arabic theme map. So we'll take it. I think that turned out pretty well, even though the color scheme is a bit stereotypical and boring, but I think it blends in well. The one thing I probably would go back and change is the color of the cars and the coasters themselves, because I was thinking kind of like Manta or things of that nature, where like or even like Banshee, or not, yeah, I guess Banshee's purple and blue, and the track is the same-ish colors, I think purple, blue, and gray. And, or like, oh gosh, Gatekeeper is blue, pretty much light blue, sky blue, or maybe sea blue. So I was thinking of that kind of theming where the coaster is very close in color to the train itself. I don't think it looks incredible here, but it looks good enough. Now, the one thing I wanted to improve on, though, was the coaster stations, because I think that the other buildings that I built in this park are actually pretty solid and some of my favorite ones that I've built in any of the parks so far. But the other coaster station over there is my least favorite part, and I kind of just left it there because I wasn't going to spend the time or the money changing it out and trying to make it look any better. So I kind of went all out on this one. One of the things that I wanted to really include, though, was just include, since I couldn't get too many path elements or different crossings between path and coaster, since junior coasters are just not something that tend to have, path interaction. And, for the most part, I don't think Gerstlauers do either, especially because Gerstlauers are supposed to be so confined. But I really want to have more path interactions in my park. So since I couldn't have a path interaction with the junior coaster, I wanted to have some station interaction, which I'll get back to in a second, because here's my really, really bad knockoff spires. I actually tried to take this this build technique from Silverette, and I think that he does it a little bit better than I do, so I'll probably have to go back and take a look at how he did them, because essentially you're just stacking different cones on top of each other to try to give that dimension of like the swirly like ice cream cone effect on the top. It does like an okay job of it, but it's not my favorite. But anyways, getting back to what I was saying just a few seconds ago, since I could not have that path interaction that I really wanted to, I wanted to make it so that the junior coaster, because they're not supposed to be thrillful, so they should at least have some environment and I guess just immersion that other coasters may not have. I think that's something that a lot of coasters in the U.S. right now really lack. And I know I've mentioned Velocicoaster in a few different episodes, but they're actually doing some test runs, and they just took down the construction wall, so a lot of people are getting to see that coaster for the first time. And though I think some people are really upset with the fact that it looks like the first half of that coaster might be a little bit slower than what they thought it was going to be, overall, I think that once they start the coaster, or once they get it running, the first half will be a little bit faster and people will be more happy about it. But the reason why people like Velocicoaster so much, other than the fact that Intamin puts out some really good coasters, is that it is so immersive. There's so many different design elements to like the shrubs and trees, and just you feel like you are in Jurassic Park when you're on that ride, right? So that's something that I really wanted to add here, and just have it snake through the coaster building just a little bit. And I actually wanted to add like some different like leveling too. So all of the front part of this facade is pretty standard. I actually steal the technique of layering like the castle. I forget what they're called. They begin with a C, but basically the up and down checkering with the some just basic different cubes, and I think that looks pretty good. But like I said, I wanted to have some levels for here where you're kind of coming outside of the coaster station, and then you're heading back through and out back towards the brake run, which is missing actually, but the really tail end of the coaster. This is a pretty cool thing that if you're on the ride, I think you'd enjoy to see, right? You're coming outside for a second. It'll probably go dark when you're going inside. I actually did not check and see if that part of the coaster that tucks right next to the queue path is actually going over top of it, because if so, I probably should have added some covering for the people on the queue path, and that would actually also get pretty loud to listen to it go through. But I added some decoration and stuff to really make the ride feel alive, and I think that little extra bit of detail, going back to like a Velocicoaster, right, is what makes newer rides so attractive. And I hope that that's going to be a trend that amusement park owners, as well as ride designers, keep doing. And I guess depending on how well Velocicoaster does here in the next 2 years especially, that will help determine whether or not those kind of type of rides will happen. So I'll keep doing my part of building them in game and making them look good in game. If everybody else does their part, and once it's safe to do so, obviously, gets down to see that coaster and take a ride on it, because I, for one, am incredibly excited to do that. But now, getting away from the Jurassic Park theme and going back to the Middle Eastern theme, essentially, the design that I did on the front of this is what I keep doing, basically with the other three sides of this facade. It's not really that interesting of a build once you break it down to the parts. The most interesting, and unfortunately, conversely, the hardest thing to do was the different sections that the coaster intersected with the building. I really wanted to have that kind of symmetric and nice feeling to all the different walls, but since I wanted to have the intersection of the coaster, it's really hard to make it look good. I'm not sure the structural integrity of what I have here, especially with different pillars that I have just like kind of free hanging above. In my head, I kind of assume they're just more stucco than support beams, and the support beams are kind of tucked away on like the backside, hidden from like sight. That way, it is structurally sound, but it does look a little bit strange. Like I try to cover it up to the best of my ability, adding like different borders and things to make it look like there's a reason and a purpose for it being there. So like there, it doesn't look horrendous, but it's definitely not my favorite way of doing that. So maybe there's a better way to do it, and if you guys know one, and by it I mean like making that little area, that cutout essentially for the coaster to go through, look better, I'd love to know your suggestions, because so far everybody's going to be really good ones, and like I've mentioned before, suggestions are how I learn as a builder, and suggestions are how people grow in general, so definitely open to those. Now, although you won't really be able to tell through all the magic of editing, this part, or at least this portion of designing this park, was probably the toughest part of everything, really. Even though getting started and finding a place to start was challenging, I could not, for the life of me, get to 400 guests. I wanted so badly to get the optional goals in this park, but I think I just took out a loan a little bit too late. I spent a lot of money early, but I kept my park financials pretty much intact, so I was pretty much positive cash flow the entire time that I ran the park. But as it was getting closer and closer to the optional goal deadline, which was March, and you can see it's March right now, I took out like I think an 8,000 loan, which I didn't really need, but I just wanted to try to build that coaster, that flat ride you see, the twister. Of course, had to include that to my park. But yeah, that was just something that was really challenging to do, and I'll get back to that in a second, because I got to have my subscriber input here again. I was really, really happy that lanterns were suggested, because this was something that I was kind of putting off for a while, this little middle section here, because there wasn't a lot of space from both sides of the teacups ride on the left, and then like that airplane ride on the right. But adding something like this, I think, really helped, like kind of like add to like what I was saying earlier, like the different subdivisions of the park. I think the lanterns give a really great feel. I think having these like almost like broken down wall structures, or like just almost like decorative archways, right, with the different trees, palm trees, the oh gosh, I forget the name of those ones, but the fancy looking ones, and some different shrubs here and there, I think really adds like the atmosphere, and it ties that little portion of area that was a little bit too small to have a building in really well. And then finish off with just adding some trees and different things here. And I think we're going to get to our real-time part, so I can show you what the park looks like now. And so here we are. Here's the entranceway, which I love so dearly. I know it's not your typical park entrance, because it divides into multiple different areas, but I love how the teacup ride is so open right there and looks out on the northern part of our oasis. And I guess as we go over to like the northwest hand quadrant of the map, we have a really big pavilion area that's supposed to showcase, for the most part, our Gerstlauer Eurofighter or drop coaster. That's the highlight of basically the entire park, even though the Q station may not be that great. But I guess going south here a little bit, I love this transition that, is highlighted by the brake run. What an awesome element, right? A few little different buildings that remind us of movies, and our little section that's kind of, cut off from the rest of the park, but just looks so gorgeous. Our beautiful ship ride, and as we're going to the right, we have a couple flat rides with just really basic queue lines, but our subdividers with the lanterns and our pillars, our bathroom building that's also serves the queue line, and then our palace with the really funny ice cream cone spires. But overall, it was a really awesome park and something that I'll enjoy looking at for a while. So thanks everybody for watching. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.